Okay, here we are. We're back with another interview with a brother from Kappa Beta Sigma. Today we have Brother President Juan. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
And so these interviews have really just been about what Sigma means to you. And it's as is normal with Sigma, we do things in three. So I got three questions for you. And so we're just going to start off right away. I guess the first question is, how did you come to Sigma? What brought you to Sigma? Was it somebody that you saw? Did you see a flyer? Were you one of those guys that got to school knowing that he was going to pledge Sigma? How'd you get to Sigma?
Well, so my mother is a Zeta.
Okay. So it's in the blood.
Apparently, and most people assume that that's sort of what brought me to Sigma. The truth of the matter is it's not. It has nothing to do with it. When I was growing up and started to become aware of especially Black Greek organizations, it didn't appeal to me. Wasn't really anything that was as exciting as baseball, which was basically my life at that point. Okay. And she would always say, you're going to become a Sigma man, and I remember being in high school and saying, nah, that's just not for me. And she said, and this is my mother. She's very prophetic in the things that she says, and she says, don't worry, it'll happen. And I pretty much forgot about it. Forgot about fraternities, forgot about, sororities, or even about most activities in a college campus.
Now, did you play baseball when you went to school?
Yeah, so I played, and that was really my focus, was getting to a D1 school that I could play baseball at, and I went to West Virginia University, and that was really my focus. And but I never imagined that there would be life outside of playing baseball. Okay. When I was in high school, when I was in middle school, was if I wasn't playing, on the school team, I was playing in some kind of
pickup
organized league or something like that. But when you're in college, it's baseball, and there's a season, but there's the rest of the experience that goes into college and in the atmosphere. And one of the players, the other Black guy
on the team,
right? And I really bonded naturally. And he's actually my Sans, but pledged Alpha.
Oh.
And
sorry to hear that.
But we never knew that, we never had that conversation. But what really brought me to Sigma was, so it's kind of an interesting story. It was kind of by mistake.
Okay.
So my friends that lived on my floor or in my dorm, they all were very interested. And I had a car. And
so you were the
ride.
Know where
this is going.
You were the ride.
So
but you come inside.
Right. So we were, there's two campuses in West Virginia. You have the Evansdale campus and the downtown campus. So the old school and the new school, right? So the dorms were up on Evansdale, and if you know anything about WVU, it sits on a mountain. So while it's only like a mile away, it's a mile up or down the hill. So it's not, necessarily walkable. So I remember everybody was getting ready to do, I was like, where y'all headed? He says, so one of the brothers, who honestly, I don't know if I was really aware that he was a Sigma, said to me, are you going to the meeting?
I am now.
What meeting? This is the meeting, because everybody around me was getting prepared to go to this meeting. And I was like, I don't know about the meeting. And, one of the things about WVU, and especially the chapter, Rho Theta, is we just do things. No, not Mau Mau. That's, Mau Mau is
no, you were the
Kent State.
you were the Black Panther party, the
Yeah,
Black Panther.
Black Panther chapter.
Black Panther chapter.
Similar histories and philosophies.
Yeah.
Kent State is Mau Mau. There's an interesting story behind that too. Jordan, who recently reactivated the chapter, actually came from Mau Mau. So it's interesting that you would say that.
Okay.
In any event, long story, shorter, we, wasn't the type of, it wasn't a formal interest meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of just a meet and greet. So I didn't have to wear a tie or any of that kind of stuff. And we all jumped in the car, and I found myself waiting in this waiting room. And then we went into this meeting to learn about this organization. Still did not hit me.
That it was the organization your mother was
Still
talking.
did not hit me. It had not hit me yet. What I realized, and this is what really brought me to Sigma, was each and every person in the room, and it's a small chapter. It was maybe 6 of them. Mm-hmm. I think with the exception of 1 or 2 I had met, and I didn't know their affiliation with the organization.
Okay.
And they were people that I admired, but I admired for the things that they were doing, either
Correct.
on campus or
Right.
the way in which they conducted themselves, or maybe a conversation that we had, all in different settings.
Mm.
And there were other organizations that I would see that wore their date on their shirt every day. I don't know if they washed them.
We're not going to be disparaging to other organizations, even though they may deserve it.
But it was their identity,
Right.
and
But these brothers seem to have their own identity, and they just happen to be Sigmas as well.
Exactly, and that's really what appealed to me. And from that point on, diving into the history of what Sigma was about, but not only what Sigma was about. Like you said, we were the Black Panther chapter. Mm-hmm. My mother happens to be a former Black Panther as well. Mm-hmm. So that, history, and that's when it started to
click together for you.
So I called my mother and I was like, "Hey, Mom, thinking about this organization." And she said, "I know, Phi Beta Sigma." And I was like, "Well, how did you know?" I said, "I told you." And I was like, "Man, she's always right about these things." And then, the Black Panther connection, and really, that always intrigued me. It's
Right.
one of the coolest things I always tell people about my mother, especially people who know her. Because they know her for, professionally, they know her personally, but I don't know if they all know that radical, individual who she is. And it really, creates some layers in one of my heroes, which is my mom.
And so it's really interesting, not to get off the Sigma piece, but, in thinking about Black Panthers, and when most people think about Black Panthers who are not the uninitiated, mm-hmm. they always think of these uber radical people who
Right.
were running around with guns and stuff like
Right.
that. But the Black Panther Party was so layered. There was so many different things to do and so many different things that they were trying to do
Right.
that not everybody. Now, I'm not saying that your mom wasn't one of those, but
Right.
but not everybody was running around with guns and
Right.
and not having the image that most people think of when they think of the Black Panthers. They were community organizers.
Right.
They were people who were radical in their thought that Black people deserved a place in this country and deserved certain services in this country just like everybody else. And that was where they were radical, not necessarily military in their function.
Absolutely. So. I think one of the things that the way that I like to put it is they were the original progressives.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They were the ones who pushed the envelope, understood that the law could work for themselves or should work for them, for our communities. And, one of the things I love that my mom talks about and what really appealed to her was their breakfast program. Mm-hmm. And understanding, even to this day, we have so many kids that without, when we talk about COVID and things like that, when you think about just in terms of where kids are going to be able to eat, mm-hmm. The school provides that service for them. And without schools being open, not having that access to a quality meal may not be available to them.
Absolutely.
And, you now kind of go back in history to a time when the Black Panthers were around, especially in Northern California, that was a reality for many children, and they were just trying to solve very small and basic
fundamental
issues.
questions.
Exactly.
Fundamental questions of existence in this country.
Exactly.
So you become a Sigma, right? What year did you pledge?
What?
What year did you?
Spring '98. I thought you said what day.
It's like, no, I don't remember the day.
I think it was Saturday. I think it was Saturday.
So you come in spring '98.
Yes.
What has been one of your greatest memories about being a Sigma?
You know, that's an interesting question. It changes.
Because you're making new memories?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. And some of the earlier memories weren't great. You know, we got into trouble. You know, as undergraduates
do.
And I learned a lot. And I think, so what would invariably be considered to be a negative really taught me about brotherhood. And you know, it's interesting because I have conversations with a lot of younger brothers, and I mean younger brothers not necessarily in age, but brothers that are coming into the organization,
right.
You know, brand new, and you know, I think we've all had this conversation with, oh well, I don't need to pay anybody to have friends. They don't really understand what brotherhood is all about, and that's because it's almost impossible to describe.
Good point. Yeah.
It's much easier to show. At least, you know, from my experience. And oftentimes it takes, you know, sort of like, you know, almost like a stress to build up those bonds. Similar to how, you know, working out, you're basically tearing the muscle fibers
so they could build it back up. Yeah. Okay.
And I think it was that stress, you know, again, we were a small chapter. I think there's 8 of us at, you know, at our largest point at West Virginia. And again, you know, when you're a collegiate, you're, and in an environment like West Virginia where once that first snowfall happens, you're not leaving campus, not to go home or anything like that. So your fraternity was basically the chapter. And we're talking about a time where there was no email, wasn't, you know, the internet wasn't developed the way that it was. You know, still paying long distance for phone calls to go call back home. So, you know, communications and, you know, social media wasn't a thing. So, you know, the way in which collegiates communicate now is a lot different. But for us, it was just the 8 of us.
Right.
You know, and it was about relying on one another, especially in these stressful situations, and still focusing on our schoolwork.
Right.
You know,
because you know, student leader, the first part of that is student.
Right. Yeah. So I think that those were, I think, my earliest memories. And the brotherhood aspect of things is definitely something I'm still learning about. You know, I'd never had an opportunity to, you know, as a collegiate to be in charge of bringing in new members.
Okay.
But as an alumni, in the fall of 17, bringing in, you know, new members into the organization.
We still can't get them out. No, just kidding.
I know, and these guys, 7 of them. But there's having those special relationships with them. You know, is and seeing them have the special relationships and saying to them, I remember having the conversation because all I can do is impart my experience. You know, I'm not talking from a place of I have more knowledge than you. I'm talking about, you know, here's my experience and you know, you take with what you will. But seeing and explaining certain components of brotherhood and saying, you all are not friends. I don't expect you to be friends. You know, I honestly don't care if you argue. I honestly don't care whether or not you like each other. Because I think in family, there's many family members we don't like. But you defend one another, you know, and you never give up on one another.
Yeah.
And seeing that and seeing, you know, the falling apart and the breaking, you know, and coming back together and building that brotherhood, you know, and watching it work. That to me is, I think, the greatest experience of Sigma that I've seen is seeing brotherhood build.
Yeah. And that's a nugget that a lot of people don't get about fraternities, and when chapters actually work. Like, there are people who in Sigma that I don't get along with, but that's my brother. Right. At the end of the day, if he reaches out to me and he needs me, I'm going to be there for him. And it's the same way, and people just can't find a place in their brain to make that make sense for them. And I'm like, but you have that inside of your own families, right? There's cousins that you don't mess with, right? It's like cousins who don't think the same way that you do, but God forbid they need your help, you're going to like step up to the plate. And I think what it is that you're born with your family, but to make a decision to have that kind of relationship with somebody who isn't part of your family is something that people can't make a leap of faith for.
Yep.
So, I always tell people that there are a number of things that happen in my life, the number of places that I've gone in my life, and the field that I'm in right now is because of Sigma. What things in your life do you attribute directly back to being a Sigma? Like, what have you benefited? What some work experience or relationship, or what has Sigma done for you?
You know, it's interesting because I don't oftentimes stop to think about that, and I don't know how many people do. For me, I've always tried to make sure that it wasn't a catalyst for anything that I did, but was an accompaniment.
Okay.
You know, and what I've noticed over time is that some of the strongest relationships that I have with people, are oftentimes because of Sigma. And I think that's just a byproduct of us having, sort of some
commonality.
Some commonality. And having, I think, for instance, there's been conversations that I have with brothers, just, having a sit down and I can have with a brother that I realize, like, 30 minutes in a conversation, I've revealed a lot. Perhaps more than I would have been normally comfortable. I consider myself to be a guarded person, and oftentimes those conversations are therapeutic in a way.
All right. So the fraternity has been. It's so funny because we just had I just sat on a panel yesterday and talked about Black men with mental health and being able to address the issues that are happening in our society and having a place to talk about things and how it affects them and how they're able to find spaces where they can be vulnerable. Right. And so one of the things that we talked about is that if you don't go to a therapist, then, because there's a stigma against going to therapy, but at least finding somebody that you can have that safe space where you can have those conversations. Absolutely. It sounds like the fraternity has provided that for you.
Yeah, I think I didn't grow up having a brother. I honestly didn't grow up having many people who functioned in that bigger brother role. Little brother role, and I think oftentimes the little brother role is almost as important as the big brother role.
Forces you to mature.
And be responsible to someone. And I think that piece is one thing, because I think as Black men, we have a responsibility to one another, and that responsibility oftentimes is too informal. And I think that lets us off the hook.
Okay.
Because if things sort of don't go the way that you want, or or you like, I think the fact that the fraternity itself is a lifetime commitment, or should be, even the financial component of it, and the fact that paying dues there's a habitual responsibility to something,
right?
And it teaches you so much about certain aspects of what being a Black man and being part of something larger than yourself. And I'd tell I don't think a lot of people get that also. Oh, well, you'll hear interests talk about, well, I want to be involved in service. Well, you don't need the fraternity for that.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Go clean up the highway, go, sweep the street, or, give out some whatever.
And there are plenty of organizations that'll help facilitate that are not fraternity.
You don't need to necessarily be involved in this. I think, it's part of our mission. Absolutely. But before you can even get to that mission, and the power of that mission is really in its history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other component that's really very appealing to me. Like, one of the things in digging into the history, for almost I guess over 100 years, we had, well, maybe not over, I guess it was about 100 years, we had a brother who was just missing.
Right.
One of our founders was just, what happened to this guy?
Yeah. Just completely gone.
So just, that is very compelling to me, just thinking about that and sitting on my couch or in a long drive between, driving from campus to home, just daydreaming about what that might have been like, in the early 1900s, at a time where World War I, was happening. What was it like for Black people in America?
And that's the piece that gets lost on a lot of people. Like, all of these organizations were founded in a time when it was not cool, as in not even fashionable. It was just like almost illegal to be smart, right? And so here you have these people who are professing to have a higher level of education and a higher thought process and are organizing in the face of the most strenuous in the Jim Crow South and the post liberation South, right? And just saying to each other like, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and do this,
right?
I'm a Sigma, so I'm always going to have to big up our organization. And I always say, like, we got it done with 3 people, but, like, there were, 7 people in Alpha, and, like, I don't remember how many other people for other places, but just the bravery of those people just sitting down in whichever rooms they organized in and saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the crazy piece.
And thinking about what that looks like, especially us as a chapter, we meet in a YMCA, similar to how our founders
did. Yes.
And just the juxtaposition of that history and thinking about it. And, we are but a blip,
mm-hmm.
In the overall history of African Americans in this country. But what can we now impart to the future that may not know us as well?
Correct.
How can we make sure that we build? Because I think far too often we've sort of reinvented the wheel as Black people.
Right.
And I think that's a great thing.
Fighting the same struggles over and over again when somebody already laid down that groundwork.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's why I'm big on the history, because and digging into the history, Sigma is one of the only fraternities that doesn't actually know its first 100 members.
Mm.
And that's sad. But what it does is it makes us more cognizant of that history is very important, because maybe we didn't realize this was historic. Did we realize that, 3 men and did our founders envision this, us, you and me sitting here talking about 106 years of history? I don't know.
Right. And that's really a profound thing, because we oftentimes, we romanticize our founders. All of our organizations romanticize our founders and think that absolutely they were about founding something that was going to last for this amount of time. And there's no way that I think that they could have had that kind of premonition, that it would have been an international organization like that has chapters in Ghana now, right? So, but we like to believe that. It was like, oh yeah, this is the road that they. This
is exactly what they had in mind.
But it's it's interest. It's a very interesting thing that when you start to peel back all of the different layers and stuff.
I mean, from the time in which, and I don't want to take them out of the equation, but from the time in which, the alphas were founded to the time in which sigmas were founded, taking out the iotas, that period of time was less than 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, all these organizations were founded, 10 years ago in our chapter, not much has changed.
Right. Exactly.
So to think about how that, that vision was at that time and why, what happened that made such greatness happen in this 10-year span.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And I stop and wonder about that all the time. Like, what was going on in the world, in the country, that made this 10-year span such a catalyst for the creation of all of these organizations? And then you expand it even furthermore to when Sigma Gamma Rho comes along in 1922. And again, not meaning to exclude the alphas, but they came along, the iotas, but they came along much later.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely. And then, the thing about it is if you again start to think about the sororities and the fraternities and those relationships that were built, and over time what steps needed to be taken, and sort of those forgotten heroes that was there a day when this whole thing was gonna fall apart?
Somebody like put it on their back,
and they just carried it.
And we have those romanticized images of Scruggs and the Taylor brothers. Like we talk about that all the time, but there's probably a lot of other places that we don't have those histories about.
Yep.
Well, you know what? Thank you. This is started off with your experience, but again, you can't talk about our own personal experiences without talking about the history of the organization. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it.
And so this has been another installment of Talking with the Brothers for Kappa Beta Sigma, and one of these days we'll interview somebody from another chapter. But we got enough brothers in Kappa Beta Sigma, so I think we'll get through these first. Yeah. All right. Thanks, bro.
Thank you.